Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from the Honorable Anna Webster Roy, MP, Member for Tobago East, Dr. Tim Gopi Singh, MP, Member for Caroni East, and Mr. Rushton Parry, MP, Member for Miaro, who have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 1 to 2, the audited financial statements of Taurus Service Limited for the financial years ended September 30th, 2017 and 2018. 3, the audited financial statements of National Information and Communication Technology Company Limited for the financial year ended September 30, 2019. I beg to move that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The Minister of Trade and Industry.
Madam Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Trade and Industry, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Papers 4, 5, and 6, the administrative report of InvestTT Limited for the years ended September 30th, 2015, 2016, and 2017. Papers 7, 8, and 9, the administrative report of the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards for the years ended September 30th, 2014, 2015, and 2016. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Minister of National Security.
On behalf of the Minister of National Security, I have the honor to lay the following papers. Paper number 10, the Strategic Services Agency Regulations 2020. Paper number 11, the Strategic Services Agency Personnel Regulations 2020. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Committees, Prime Minister's questions.
The member for Couva North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 1. Can the Prime Minister explain the exorbitant increase of the estimated costs for the new Tobago terminal from 500 million to 870 million?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the figure of 500 million was a notional line item approximation used by the Minister of Finance about 3 years ago when the project was mooted, and it did not include proper designs and so on. So to use that figure as an exorbitant increase to 870 million is to misunderstand and misrepresent the situation. When the drawings were available and the project was properly conceptualized, the engineer's estimate could have been established, and that engineer estimate was $811 million. 881 million. I'm correct. I stand corrected. 881 was the engineer's estimate of the project as completely determined after the concept. When it went out to tender, Madam Speaker, the contract price is now 870 million because that is the process as per a contractor bidding on a specific design. So, Madam Speaker, I take careful note of the fact that my colleagues consider this construction of $870 million facility in Tobago as exorbitant. They didn't find it exorbitant to leave $1 billion in the field and beat them on a useless wastewater plant. They didn't find $921 million exorbitant to leave with OAS when they removed the clause from the contract for the Point 14 highway to allow OAS to go away with $921 million. And of course, Madam Speaker, this facility for Tobago is a facility for Trinidad and Tobago because it brings Tobago's economy as a contributor into the national economy as we grow the tourism product and plant in Tobago. We don't find it exorbitant at all. We find it a very useful investment in the nation's infrastructure.
Speaker, Prime Minister, since it was an estimated cost of $500 million, it has now gone to $870 million. How many years would it take the people of Trinidad and Tobago to repay this loan to the government of China?
We're not allowed that as a supplemental question. Member for Urupuch West.
Prime Minister, as you're aware, Section 5 has already been published, which means evaluation date has been established. Does this increase in the amount from 500 to 870 include payments to Cranston residents on both sides of the agricultural lands, the payment for they to be removed, for lands taken under compulsory acquisition?
Speaker, I don't know what the law school is producing these days. This is the construction cost, and there's no section 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 involved with this. This is the construction cost. We're hiring a contractor to build. The government was very clear at an earlier time and all along that there's a land acquisition process of an estimate of $300 million. The Minister of Finance has made that clear. This figure is the construction cost. One has to add to that the land acquisition because you have to have the land to build the facility on, Madam Speaker. And we are very clear on that. So there's no question of any section 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5.
Supplemental, member for Urupuch East.
Prime Minister, given your deep concern with the cost of land acquisition for the Point 14 to San Fernando Highway, and the fact that in that project the government had estimated in advance what it will cost to acquire lands, would you indicate what is the estimated cost in addition to the $870 million construction cost for a terminal? What is the estimated cost for the acquisition of lands pursuant to this project?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I suspect that my colleagues are not present. I just stood up and said that the estimated cost for land acquisition is $300 million. And as I sit down, he gets up to ask me the same question. Finally, Madam Speaker, the construction cost is $870 million to build the facility. The land that is acquired for building the facility is subject to land acquisition processes, and I answer that in the context of a question being raised about Section 5, and we're saying that separate and apart from the construction cost is an estimate for land acquisition of $300 million. What is so difficult to understand?
Member for Urupuch East.
Minister, could I ask the Prime Minister if the government believes that $1.1 billion plus is value for money for a terminal, for one terminal?
Prime Minister.
I just said, yes, it's a major investment in the national infrastructure, in this case in Tobago, to facilitate an expansion of the tourism facilities in Tobago. We anticipate, Madam Speaker, that there would be significant growth in tourism in Tobago, and one facility to bring about that growth is a proper modern terminal to handle a larger number and larger aircraft in Tobago. Madam Speaker, anybody who professes to have any interest in Tobago will know that the existing facility in Tobago is an encumbrance and a hindrance to growth in tourism in Tobago. And I can't understand why my colleagues on the other side have a problem with constructing a terminal building in Tobago for $870 million, but they had no problem in giving OAS $921 million to Bowie. And you, that's part of it. Right? And you can say what you want. The people of Tobago will get their facility, and this government is going to ensure that it's built.
So I hope that we now regain our composure and this kind of outburst does not continue. Member for Barataria, San Juan, supplemental.
Minister, I just want a small question. How many Tobagonians do you think will be working on that project to build that terminal?
Madam Speaker, I have no specific figure, but I do know that opportunities will arise for Tobagonians to work on the project of building the terminal. The fact that it is being done by a locally registered Chinese company does not mean that Tobagonians are not a part of it, and Tobagonians will play a significant role in constructing that facility.
To the Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister provide an update on the state of negotiations between the government and Patriotic Energies and Technologies Company Limited as it relates to Patriotic being selected by the Cabinet to be the preferred bidder for the sale of Guaracara Refining Company Limited and Paria Fuel Trading Company Limited?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, as we have indicated in this House before, one of the aspects of the attempt to generate an interest in the reopening of the refinery was the creation of a data room before any bidding process had taken place, where interested parties could come and see the data relating to the operations of the refinery. Subsequently, Patriotic has been selected as the company of choice in the process. As we have done that, Patriotic has now indicated that they would like to see the actual refinery itself in greater detail. And as a result of that, several subject matter experts have been established, a committee of subject matter experts, meaning persons who are intimately familiar with the refinery as a physical entity. They are now preparing. Next week, they'll make their first sojourn into the refinery, along with Patriotic, to provide this additional information which they asked for, subject to the examination by the data, by information from the data room. That should be done early next week. And based on the outcome of these negotiations, Madam Speaker, a decision will be made about the final buyer for the refinery, and we hope to do so by the end of March.
Member for Couva South, supplemental.
Thank you. Prime Minister, could you confirm if Patriotic has been able to indicate to the government of Trinidad and Tobago that it is in a position to purchase, to finance the purchase and operations of the refinery?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, to the best of my knowledge, that is a process that is underway. I know of no withdrawal of enthusiasm or expectation. The process is underway.
Aprima.
Would you say on reflection that it was a mistake to close the Petrotrin refinery, given the problems that you encounter and the cost of restarting the said project?
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Prime Minister, you have, based on what you have said to this House today, the work of the evaluation committee, what is the status of the evaluation committee as it relates to this preferred bidder status that was granted to Patriotic? Because the evaluation committee was supposed to finish its work within 6 weeks of the statement that was made by the Minister of Finance in the other place when the Parliament was in operation.
You have to understand, Madam Speaker, that no one party can negotiate by itself. It's a negotiating process. The evaluation committee has to work alongside the company that is prepared to take up the issue. So there is some element of delay involved, but we can't go faster than Patriotic is prepared to go. And the evaluation committee has to have something to evaluate. So if Patriotic has asked for additional information in this expert review of the plant, well, that is just a part of the process.
Member for Point up here.
So the Prime Minister, based on after Patriotic has evaluated this extra information about the refinery and they have withdrawn and they're no longer interested, what will be the position? Sure. Prime Minister, based on what you said about Patriotic requiring more information about the refinery and doing an evaluation of it, or evaluation, if the information is given to them and they now withdraw their bid or their interest, what will be the position as far as the refinery for the country of Trinidad and Tobago?
Mr. Speaker, that should be a relatively easy question to answer. We get back to square one where we were, where we don't have a bidder. As the process generated that Patriotic, selection of Patriotic, and we are working with them towards a point where if they complete their interest in the matter, then we have a restart of some time. What is happening now is we're moving from the data room evaluation to actually looking at the refinery itself, the actual refinery. This expert group we talk about is going to go through the refinery with Patriotic to ensure that it is clear as to what the restart would require and in terms of the investment in the restart. So this is the process. If along the way Patriotic determines that it is too much for them or they're no longer interested, well then we're back to square one. We don't have an interested party. And we will have a refinery which would be number 18 in the world, which is not operating. What we're doing is trying to get, to work alongside the interested party to determine whether we are in a position to restart the refinery or not. And that is a process that I've just outlined.
Supplemental member for Opuchis.
Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, in the context of the Minister of Finance announcing with great fanfare the selection of a preferred bidder and the only local company with knowledge of the refinery and that brought money to the table, is it that you are telling us today the government don't know if, where, and how much money the preferred bidder can raise, and the preferred bidder now needs a tour of the installation to better position their bid? Prime Minister, what kind of Mickey Mouse business has been taking place on this matter?
That is not a question. Madam Speaker, that is not a question. That is not a question requiring an answer. That's an opinion. That's an opinion. And I'm not prepared to comment on the opinion of an underminer.
Member for Caroni Central.
Prime Minister, based on the recent exchange of old one.
Member for Caroni Central, 1 minute, please. I just heard somebody use certain language that I really don't think is appropriate for you. Okay? And while it is that we are very passionate about what our views are in here, I would ask everybody to maintain the type of decorum that is required and expected, okay, and which the people of Trinidad and Tobago deserve. Okay? Member for Oropouchis, I know you are seasoned and you know much better. So just withdraw that and let's get swiftly along.
I withdraw.
Thank you very much. Member for Member for Cooper South, member for Laventille West. The same applies. Okay? Member for Carney Central. Sorry, please continue.
Prime Minister, based on the recent exchange of old $100 bills for new polymer notes, can the Prime Minister inform this House what is the total quantum of money disbursed by the central bank to cover the replacement of old $100 notes?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, as of today, the central bank reports that the exchanges in the context, the disbursement in the demonetization process is $5.4 billion.
Supplemental, Member for Carney Central.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. If that is the amount collected from outside, what is the quantum of money, to your knowledge, within the banking and financial sector?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I would like my colleagues to use the same verb that I use. It is not what is collected from outside. The question I answered is what did the central bank disburse to the banking community? The central bank disbursed in terms of new notes to the banking community for the purpose of exchanging $5.4 billion. I don't know where the collected is coming from because that confuses the issue. And if one wants to get accurate information, one needs to say exactly what we're talking about. There's a big difference between what the central bank would have made available to the commercial banks as against what we have collected from them. Because money could have been made available from the bank, from the central bank, to the other banks, which is not collected. So I would just make that clarification.
Supplemental, Member for Carney Central.
Would the Prime Minister be able to say how much money was exchanged by, no, how much money was exchanged by citizens using the opportunity to exchange old notes for new notes?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I am not in a position to give an accurate figure on that. And if I understand the member's question, the central bank makes certain information available through its quarterly reports. And secondly, if the member wants to file the appropriate question to the Minister of Finance, who can consult the central bank on that level of detail, then I'm sure the answer could be forthcoming as long as it doesn't violate the Central Bank Act.
Member for Carney Central.
Yes. Is the amount that the $5.4 billion that the Prime Minister indicated was disbursed for this purpose, is that the total quantum of notes ordered by the central bank and printed to cover the entire exchange process, or was it a larger amount?
Prime Minister.
Central Bank, Madam Speaker, in carrying out this exercise would have been cognizant of the amount of money that is supposed to be in circulation through $100 bills. And it would, Madam Speaker, it would be logical, as it was factual, for the central bank to have ordered enough money to cover the monies that were out in circulation. And the member knows where he can find the figure of what was in circulation. And the answer is that the central bank did order as much money as was required to cover what was in circulation. So it would have ordered far more than $5.4 billion.
Member for Carney Central.
Prime Minister, given the downward trend of natural gas and related commodity prices across the world, and given the growing uncertainty faced by all energy stakeholders in the current environment, could the Prime Minister state what new approach, if any, will the government take to address the survival of stakeholder companies and the sustainability of Trinidad and Tobago's natural gas cluster?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, with respect to the question speaking about all energy stakeholders, this covers everyone involved and dependent on the energy sector, whether it's the government, the private sector, the public sector, the local sector, the international sector. As you know, Madam Speaker, the hydrocarbon business, oil and gas, particularly oil, is very volatile. And in recent times, in the last 24 months in particular, the prices have gone up, down, and across. And of course, in the last 5 years, the market has changed considerably. In some instances, importers have become exporters. And we in Trinidad and Tobago are severely impacted by that. But at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, all these energy stakeholders have an interest in ensuring that there is business in a place like Trinidad and Tobago. So upstreamers who would hold on to prices for supplying the raw material to downstreamers would have an interest in ensuring that downstreamers exist, and downstreamers are operating and surviving and discounting in a marketplace where the prices are quite volatile. What the government is doing is staying in contact, not only as a shareholder through the NGC and as an owner with respect to the acreage that is exploited, but in talking to all those involved to ensure that we are all stakeholders in this business. And while we acknowledge the sanctity of contracts, we believe that contracts are not cast in stone. So it is in everybody's interest to ensure that those who are involved as their counterparts in the business, that they all survive together.
Supplementary member for Carry Central.
I'm glad to hear that multiple engagements, discussions are taking place within a stakeholder framework. But does that, I mean, given this situation as it is now, it is clear that all methods of practice and past decisions may not be applicable in the new environment. And what I asked in the question is that, are you going to change the approach of the government in trying to bring these stakeholders to bear in a common framework towards sustaining a Trinidad and Tobago industry?
Insofar as the government has been very proactive in taking this conversation to the principals at the level of the decision-making in these companies, such a framework does exist. And for example, the treatment, you would have heard me in this house last Friday, I think it was, speak about what is to happen at Train 1 with Shell and BP and the Chinese company that owns 10%. This is an approach of bringing everybody together to confront the essence of this question, that things have changed and are changing, and we need to adjust to suit so that Train 1 could survive. And we did mention, I don't know if you noticed, a positive position with Train 1, where there was a commitment to keep Train 1 in place, and of course, which could have an effect on Train 3, and also a major development in the government's discussion, talking to all the companies at the level of the boardrooms and those who make the decision, that we are talking now about the new arrangement for the shareholding in Atlantic LNG, where, for example, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which only now owns a shareholding in Train 1 and Train 4, that we're talking about a unitization of the shareholding, and we distribute shareholding across all the trains for all the shareholders. So this is a major development. The discussions are underway. We have partial agreement in some quarters, and we are still trying to persuade others to join in. At the end of the day, hopefully, in the second quarter of this year, we should be in a position to have adjusted that old framework into this new framework, which I dare say would be of much better value for the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Member for Naparima.
Prime Minister, is it, could you enlighten us a bit on whether your intervention and that of the member for Port of Spain, Northeast, St. Anne's West in Houston, some months ago, in terms of the price that was offered to the upstreamers, would you say that that intervention in some way led to parts of the problem that exist today? And if so, what lessons have you learned about government's intervention in that exercise?
The first question that...
I'm not even sure which one is the first one, but Madam Speaker, with your permission, I'll try to answer the question. Madam Speaker, not for the first time, and I'm sure it wouldn't be for the last time, the attempts by my colleagues on the other side to misrepresent the government's role, I will today respond to. What was happening at the time when we intervened in this matter, Madam Speaker, is that the NGC and BP had stopped negotiating. They both had dug their heels in on who wanted what at the upstream and who was prepared to pay what. What the country could not accept, Madam Speaker, was a grinding to a halt of the operations of the upstreamers in particular, because there was no gas price agreement for gas supply. What we did in that Houston meeting, Madam Speaker, wasn't to interfere in the gas price discussion in terms of determining what the price should be. But what we did was to get the two entities to come back to the table and to talk to one another and to agree on a gas price. And that is what they did. And that is what, Madam Speaker, guaranteed that there was a supply of gas in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is what carried the industry. Had we continued the way we were going, Madam Speaker, what was the outcome going to be? If the upstreamer is not prepared to produce the gas because there was no price agreed upon, there would have been no gas to supply our industries here. And I don't know why my colleagues are so upset about the fact that we did manage to get them to agree to a price. And once BP agreed to a price, Shell came on board and EOG came on board, and there was $5 billion in investment that was kicked off immediately after that. As a result of that, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago's exploration has now become extremely active, and we are now looking at, for the next 5 years, we are committed, and we continue to announce developments arising out of that foundation where we had a gas price. And Madam Speaker, finally, to be grilled by people who did not even initiate and had us here as a country with not even opening discussion about a gas price, when we had business in Point Lisas depending on a gas price for the supply from the upstream to be received by the downstream, it was downright irresponsible and dangerous. And the best thing that ever happened in this country is that this government got a gas price which generated activity that we are now looking towards in the future. So, Madam Speaker, I refuse to accept that the government's intervention, bringing the parties to an agreement, is something that we should apologize or be ashamed of. We are proud of what we have done because we have saved this country's energy sector.
Supplemental, Member for Approach West.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. What was the gas price agreed upon?
Could you repeat that question?
What was the gas price agreed upon?
I will not allow that. I will not allow that as a supplemental question. Honourable members, the time for Prime Minister's question is now spent.
Urgent questions.
Member for Faris Al-Rawi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Health, in light of the worsening global situation with regard to the novel coronavirus, now termed 19 coronavirus, can the Minister provide an update on the health status of Trinidad and Tobago nationals who are currently in China?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We now have to call this the COVID-19. We all have to get accustomed to that new name as given by WHO yesterday. Madam Speaker, to answer the question, the government is acutely concerned about the well-being of our citizens in China, and I can refer the honourable member to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who spoke extensively on this issue yesterday. The Minister of Foreign Affairs said clearly that the health status of our 120 plus nationals in China is well at this point in time. What I could always also tell this Honourable House, in my conversations with His Excellency Song Yumin, I have had 3 conversations with him on this same issue, and he has also pledged anything that the government of the People's Republic of China could provide to make the stay of our citizens in Trinidad and Tobago a safe and comfortable one. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Fazal.
That response. Minister, does the government believe that it is still safer at this time for our nationals to remain in China as opposed to offering them repatriation?
Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, again, I will refer the honourable member to the press conference by Minister Dennis Moses yesterday. Minister Moses said unequivocally that there is no request at this point in time from any citizen to come back to Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Fazal.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, in the event that citizens request repatriation, can you indicate whether the protocol for monitoring those nationals would be any different from that is currently in place? I'm referring to quarantine.
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, anyone coming from China to any part of the world, as you know, they are subject to a 14-day isolation or quarantine period, depending on the clinical assessment of whether these individuals are virus-free, suspected cases, or actual cases. We in Trinidad and Tobago have the capacity to deal with this issue. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Works and Transport, given the recent industrial action by PTSC employees and comments from the PTSC chairman that bus drivers are not adequately fulfilling their requisite duties, could the Minister please indicate what has been done to address this current and worsening situation?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for the question, giving me the opportunity to come to this chamber. Madam Speaker, the PTSC has written to the union advising of the shortcomings and also to the drivers and dispatchers, cautioning that they need to perform in accordance with their agreement. Drivers are expected to perform as many trips as their shift allows, and the PTSC is monitoring this to ensure compliance. I thank you.
Supplemental member for Couva South.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Could you inform this House how many defective buses and aged buses currently existing within the fleet of PTSC?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Madam Speaker, based on the question that was put forward, I'll be more than willing to answer that question if the member will pose it as a further question. I did not come prepared with those figures at this point in time.
Supplemental member for Couva South.
Mr. Minister, could you inform this House whether the industrial action on the part of PTSC's employees is as a result of the failure of the government to provide a mandate to the management of PTSC as it relates to negotiations for the bargaining periods 2014 to 2016, 2016 to 2019?
Minister of Works and Transport.
Based on the information supplied to me, there was a call by one of the union for several units. The PTSC was one of those corporations that was involved in some sort of union protest. We do have outstanding negotiations ongoing, and unfortunately, on that day, the bus drivers, most of the bus drivers did not show up. However, the following day, everything went back to normal. So I anticipate it could be what the member is speaking about. However, it's being dealt with by the CPO and the Ministry of Finance if that was the problem. Thank you.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Education, could the Minister inform this House of what urgent measures are being pursued to resolve the issues related to the lack of security to hundreds of schools, which is affecting students and staff due to the fact that security services provided to the Ministry of Education by the firm Superior Security has been compromised due to the failure of the Ministry to settle outstanding debts to this firm?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me first disabuse from the mind of the member for Vancouver South that there is a lack of security to hundreds of schools affecting students and staff. All of the 100 of schools are fully manned with adequate security personnel. The Ministry of Education has 6 contractors providing security services to our schools, and all are currently on site. The Superior Security Services has not withdrawn services to any of the 27 schools under their watch. Outstanding payments, Madam Speaker, to this firm, Superior Security Services Limited, have been processed by the Ministry of Education. Hyperbole.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Education has a responsibility to be accountable and not condescending, and I would ask the Minister to name the 6 contracting firms and how much money are they owed by the Ministry of Education. That is the issue.
I will not allow that as a supplemental question. Supplemental, Member for Vancouver South.
Madam Speaker, could the Minister tell this House whether the San Juan North Secondary School, the San Juan North Secondary School is one of the schools that have been affected by the threat to withdraw services by Superior Security, and this school, the actions at this school has resulted in teachers being afraid, and it has been deemed a war zone.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It is quite obvious that the member for Vancouver South does not know what he is speaking about. Sawa North Secondary School is not secured by this firm. Sawa North Secondary School is secured by MTS guards. Thank you very much.
Supplemental, Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Mr. Minister, given your earlier reply that the schools are properly manned by security companies, is the Minister happy, elated, and does the Minister condone these acts of violence and indiscipline which we read about every single day in the newspaper in the school system? Are you happy with that?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question. I will not allow it as a supplemental question.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there is one question for oral answer, and we are asking for a 2-week deferral. We know we had a previous deferral, but we are asking for another 2 weeks. And there are no questions for written answer.
So that question number 17 is deferred for a further 2 weeks.
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
Minister of Community Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have been authorized by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago to make the following statement. I have the privilege of laying before this Honorable House the National Policy on Culture and the Arts of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the period 2019 to 2024 as a green paper for public comment for the period of 1 month. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago has struggled with articulating a national culture policy for the last several decades, with at least 3 to 4 comprehensive attempts over that time. Trinidad and Tobago's uniquely diverse cultural experiences, the extremely vast and informed cultural sector, and contrasting philosophical positions on how Trinidad and Tobago should treat this rich resource would have impacted these efforts. This iteration of a culture policy for Trinidad and Tobago builds on the various policy initiatives of successive governments and the invaluable work of cultural entrepreneurs and organizations in Trinidad and Tobago's vast cultural ecology. The policy is a celebration of who we are and our many accomplishments in the realm of culture, even in the absence of a formal policy. However, it provides the critical platform for harnessing the limitless potential of our creative wealth in a manner that transforms the national landscape and ensures the nurturing of new and burgeoning talent, the sustainability of artists' livelihoods, and the ascendancy of our culture in the global cultural stratosphere, all the while expanding its contribution to the economy and national development. The policy pursues a vision of a thriving, inclusive, and dynamic cultural sector at the center of national development. It operationalizes this vision through 2 developmental themes, 5 policy goals, innumerable priority actions divided across 4 policy subsectors, and solid institutional arrangements. These altogether address the priority needs of the sector and our young nation. The 2 developmental themes are 1, national identity and cultural confidence, and 2, harmonized and strengthened cultural environment as an enabler of cultural growth. The former addresses the issues of who we are as a people and how we can shed the adverse trappings of our past to harness our best selves for personal, community, and national benefit. The second focuses on the benefit of harmony, synergy, and effectiveness in our development of all the elements of our cultural ecosystem. The 5 goals are to 1, enhance cultural confidence by enriching the participation of all in cultural development that transforms the social and economic experiences of the nation. 2, strengthen national identities, and the sense of belonging among all social groups. 3, secure and strengthen infrastructure for cultural diversity, preservation, participation, exchange, and expression. 4, support artists, entrepreneurs, and industry associations in the production of high-quality output. 5, establish and sustain an integrated institutional framework to support the cultural sector. The 4 policy subsectors through which many core recommendations are articulated are 1, the culturally confident citizen, 2, the arts, 3, heritage, memory, and legacy, and 4, cultural industries. The policy adopts a whole of government and whole of society approach to implementation, fully appreciative of the fact that culture is about all of us. As such, it brings together government ministries with their core responsibilities to work in harmony with cultural groups, contributors, and interests. It will harmonize work through a technical committee for culture and the arts, which will oversee policy implementation. The scope of the national policy on culture and the arts is as broad, diverse, and dynamic as is the cultural sector in Trinidad and Tobago, and this deliberately so, given the decades of absence of a formal culture policy in this country. The national cultural policy pursues the growth and development of our cultural sector in a holistic manner. It will focus on who we are, ensuring that our essence reflects a strong sense of cultural confidence, self-assurance, nationhood, responsibility, and solidarity. At the same time, it will seek to maximize the value ascribed to and tangible benefits to be derived from all of our cultural products in a manner that adequately rewards the artists and artistes, other cultural workers, cultural and art institutions, agencies, cultural investors, and the economy. Finally, the policy will also seek to ensure intangible benefits, the love and experience of all that is we, to every citizen, in every community of this great nation. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Princess Town.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, through you to the Honourable Minister, in light of the statement the Minister has provided, the Minister spoke about enforcing the policy through a technical committee. Could the Honourable Minister give us an indication of who would comprise this committee and how it would be appointed?
Minister of Communicative Development, Culture and the Arts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The committee would be made up of representatives of the different agencies that impact the cultural sector, as well as some representation from the artist community, and it's well enumerated in the policy and available for comment.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister, public business, committee business, motions.
Member for Digo Martin, North East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018, the Tax Information Exchange Agreements 2018, and the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019 in the 5th Session, 11th Parliament. Madam Speaker, I present for the adoption of the House the report of the Joint Select Committee on the bills just mentioned. The committee recommends that the House agree with its proposals for amendments to the bills, which I will address in detail in due course. The bills were considered and reviewed by the Parliamentary Committee and have their genesis in a global initiative to prevent tax evasion and tax avoidance through effective and regular exchange of information between global tax administration counterparts. Tax evasion and tax avoidance have become matters of acute global interest as nations tackle the threat of revenue loss through offshore tax evasion and non-compliance with taxation laws. As the world becomes increasingly globalized, taxpayers have more access to investments made through financial institutions outside their country of residence. As a result, vast amounts of money are kept offshore and may be untaxed to the extent that taxpayers fail to comply with obligations in their home jurisdiction. With the increase in cross-border flows of capital that come with a global financial system, tax administrations around the world face more and greater challenges with respect to the enforcement of tax laws than ever before. To meet these challenges, authorities must increasingly rely on international cooperation based on the implementation of international standards of transparency and effective exchange of information. These things are key to ensuring that both individual and corporate taxpayers have no safe haven to hide their income and assets, and that we pay the right amount of tax in the right place. In this environment of international cooperation, countries have come together to set standards in respect of transparency and exchange of information for tax purposes. In this regard, the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes is the international body through which work on transparency and exchange of information has been carried out by both the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, and non-OECD economies since the year 2000. The Global Forum was restructured in 2009 and has become the key international body working on the implementation of standards for tax transparency. The Global Forum is charged by the G20 nations with ensuring that these high standards are in place around the world through monitoring and peer review activities. Trinidad and Tobago became a member of the Global Forum in 2011 under the previous administration and has so far undergone a Phase 1 peer review which assessed the quality and legal and regulatory framework for the exchange of information between Trinidad and Tobago and other jurisdictions. Trinidad and Tobago launched its Phase 2 peer review, which looks at the practical implementation of the legal and regulatory framework as of June 2018. However, this review was suspended at the stage of the on-site visit. The main impediment to the completion of the review is the enactment of appropriate legislation to effectively implement international standards of transparency and exchange of information for tax purposes. After this, Trinidad and Tobago was rescheduled for review to December 2019. But because the bills before us in the report were not agreed to, we could not make this deadline and approached the Global Forum for a further deferral, which was granted to the third quarter of 2020. This deferral was approved by the Global Forum in November 2019. As it currently stands, the Global Forum has reported that Trinidad and Tobago is the only member country from its membership listing of 160 countries which is deemed to be non-compliant. This is due to the fact that Trinidad and Tobago is the only country that is yet to enact the requisite legislation to allow for effective exchange of tax information. We are here today, and it is expected that we will finally cross that hurdle and enact this package of legislation to allow Trinidad and Tobago to make good the commitment that it made in 2011. Madam Speaker, I wish to point out that tax transparency and exchange of information is not new to us. In fact, virtually identical legal requirements and administrative arrangements were introduced and have been implemented by the Tax Information Exchange Agreements, United States of America Act 2017, as it pertains to U.S. persons resident in Trinidad and Tobago. The USA Act allows for the automatic exchange of tax information between the Board of Inland Revenue and the United States Treasury on an annual basis, as well as exchange of information on request. And that could be described as the FATCA Act. Since the proclamation of that act in 2017, the exchange of tax information between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States has operated and continues to operate seamlessly without any of the problems that were thought would occur by members opposite. The package of bills before us this afternoon will allow for a similar type of exchange of tax information to take place annually as a matter of routine between Trinidad and Tobago and its treaty partners, starting with the 16 jurisdictions with which we have bilateral double tax treaties. Now, Madam Speaker, global compliance with the new standard for tax information exchange has two main components, namely a legal component and an administrative component. The legal component is grounded in the Multilateral Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, or, where parties are not party to the convention, a minimum number of executed taxation treaties that provide for exchange of information. The administrative component consists of the standard for automatic exchange of financial account information in tax matters, which has 4 elements. I'll address these in a while. With respect to the legal component, the convention I have just referred to is a treaty developed by member states of the Council of Europe and the member countries of the OECD. It has been signed and ratified by 121 nations worldwide, including all of the G20 nations, countries from Africa, Central and South America, Oceania, and the majority of CARICOM nations, such as Barbados, Grenada, Dominica, Jamaica, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This convention provides for a uniform and agreed legal basis on which tax information can be exchanged between countries and facilitates 4 methods of exchange, namely, upon request, automatically, spontaneously, or simultaneously. The convention also provides for assistance between competent authorities in order to facilitate collection of taxes. This type of assistance involves two or more competent authorities examining each in their own territory the tax affairs of a person or persons in which they have a common or related interest, with a view to exchanging the information obtained. Another type of assistance is examinations abroad, whereby representatives of a competent authority travel to another jurisdiction in order to examine the tax affairs of a person. The convention also allows for assistance in recovery of tax claims by a competent authority on behalf of another competent authority, as if they were their own claims. Therefore, Madam Speaker, the convention opens a door between the competent authorities of nations in order to ensure that there are few, if any, barriers to the effective collection of taxes. In January 2017, Trinidad and Tobago formally requested to become a signatory to the convention, but was not allowed to do so because the package of legislation which is before us today had not yet been enacted, and this was considered to be a serious deficiency. And may I say, like other things, Madam Speaker, this legislation has been with us in this Parliament for years. It has been in joint select committees for years. Madam Speaker, I now turn to the administrative component. That is the standard. In 2013, the Global Forum adopted the standard as the new accepted global standard for exchange of information for tax purposes. It represents the international consensus on automatic exchange of financial account information for tax purposes on a reciprocal basis and has 4 elements. 1, a common reporting standard that contains the due diligence rules for financial institutions. 2, the competent authority agreement that links the reporting standard to the legal basis for exchange, such as a convention or treaty. 3, commentaries that illustrate and interpret the reporting standard and the competent authority agreement. And 4, guidance on technical solutions, including schemes to be used for exchanging the information and standards in relation to data safeguards, confidentiality, transmission, and encryption. The reporting standard itself consists of reporting and due diligence requirements that underpin the automatic exchange of financial account information. A jurisdiction implementing the standard must have rules in place that require financial institutions to report information consistent with the scope of reporting set out in the common reporting standard and following the due diligence procedures in order to effectively identify reportable accounts. The institutions covered by the standard include custodial institutions, depository institutions, investment entities, insurance companies, and so on. By this definition, commercial banks, insurance companies, and certain investment entities in Trinidad and Tobago would be required to report on reportable accounts held in their institutions on an annual basis. There are some institutions that would not be required to report under the standard. These include government entities and their pension funds, international organizations, central bank, certain retirement funds, qualified credit card users, exempt collective investment vehicles, trustee, documented trusts, and other low-risk financial institutions. With respect to the information that must be reported, the standard requires the reporting of interest, dividends, account balance or value, income from certain insurance products, sales proceeds from financial assets, and other income generated with respect to assets held in a reportable account, or payments made with respect to a reportable account. Reportable accounts would include accounts held by individuals, companies, and entities. Non-reportable accounts would include retirement and pension accounts, non-retirement tax-favored accounts, term life insurance, estate accounts, escrow accounts, depository accounts due to non-returned overpayments, and other low-risk excluded accounts. It should be noted that the standard does not require institutions to report on all account holders. The due diligence component of the standard was designed to facilitate the identification of reportable accounts from amongst the full complement of financial accounts held by financial institutions. And if I go back to FATCA, in FATCA, the agreement was that we will provide information, Trinidad and Tobago will provide information on US persons and operating in Trinidad and Tobago, and also on Trinidad and Tobago citizens operating in the United States who have accounts here. This will be exactly the same with the various countries of the Global Forum. It only refers to persons who are citizens of those countries, citizens or residents, or persons in Trinidad and Tobago who do business in those countries. It does not apply to John Public, your ordinary person. In 2014, Trinidad and Tobago expressed to the Global Forum its commitment to the implementation of the standards and to a timeline for the first exchanges of information in 2017. As I've said before, we subsequently had to seek deferrals because very little had been done prior to the 2015 election, and after that we were required to enact legislation such as we are looking at today. The Joint Select Committee, which I had the privilege to chair, had as its purpose the review and reporting on bills worked on over a course of 2 sessions of Parliament. During that period, we met a total of 10 times and produced 4 reports. We also had written submissions from a number of stakeholders, such as AmCham, the Chamber of Commerce, the FIB of the Police Service, FIU, Association of Trinidad and Tobago Insurance Companies, Bankers Association, Trinidad and Tobago, Inland Revenue, European Business Chamber, Association of Real Estate Agents, Institute of Chartered Accountants, and the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. In looking at the bills, the committee looked at several issues. Concerns were raised as it relates to the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill and the notification procedure for the exchange of information. It was agreed that the requirement for notification was adequately addressed in that bill, and further notification may hamper criminal investigations. Additionally, the committee considered whether the board's power to obtain information under Clause 117, Subclause 2, or Section 117, Subsection 2 of the Income Tax Act, particularly where the provision effectively creates an exception to confidential professional relationships, including legal professional privilege. After discussions and submissions from technocrats on this point, the committee agreed that no exception was created since legal professional privilege does not attach to documents or records delivered to an attorney in an attempt to protect such documents from disclosure, nor does it apply where a criminal offense has been committed. Let me go to the bills themselves. Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018. This bill seeks to allow for the provisions of the Convention on Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters, as well as the Common Reporting Standard, to be implemented in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a critical part of our compliance with the requirements of the Global Forum and the European Union. The bill has 4 parts and 25 clauses and 7 schedules. Part 1 deals with preliminary provisions, has 7 clauses. Part 2 provides for the various forms of assistance with respect to exchange of information, has 7 clauses. Part 3 provides for compliance and enforcement under the Act and contains 5 clauses. Part 4 deals with the miscellaneous provisions and contains 6 clauses. The majority of amendments recommended by the committee are to this bill, and to a large extent capture the spirit and intent of both the Multilateral Convention and the Common Reporting Standard, and include recent developments. There are also some cleanup amendments to clauses 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 15, 16, 17, 19, 22, and 25. Amendment of the schedules was also recommended, and the insertion of a new schedule and renumbering as required. In the first part of the bill, the definition for tax in Clause 4 of that bill needs to be looked at. That definition specifies the category of taxes to which the Act would apply. The exchange of information pursuant to this bill will be in relation to the collection of taxes to which the Convention and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements, USA, Act 2017 apply, namely taxes on income or profits, taxes on capital gains, which are imposed separately from the tax on income or profits, and taxes on net wealth. Each party to the Convention has listed the taxes to which the exchange of information under the Convention would apply. That list is in Schedule 3. For Trinidad and Tobago, the applicable taxes would be corporation tax, income tax, business levy, unemployment levy, petroleum profits tax, supplemental petroleum tax, and green fund levy. These taxes are also consistent with what we have in our existing double taxation treaties. Clause 5 of the bill stipulates that for the purpose of the domestic implementation of the Act, the Board of the Inland Revenue shall be the competent authority for Trinidad and Tobago. So in our jurisdiction, our competent authority will be the Board of Inland Revenue. And the bill provides for the exchange of information between our competent authority and the various competent authorities of the countries who are party to the Convention. So they would have a similar body in their country, a similar revenue authority. Clause 6 allows for the Act to apply to any new taxes within that list I just gave, imposed after January 2017. Clause 7 empowers the Board of Inland Revenue to enter into agreements with other competent authorities for the establishment of procedures for the exchange of information, among other things. An amendment to Clause 7 was recommended by the committee to allow the Board to make adjustments to any such agreement in keeping with the adjustments and arrangements between the parties. Part 2 of the bill, which has the core provisions of the bill, relate to the exchange of information. Clause 8 requires the Board of Inland Revenue to exchange with another state applying for administrative assistance information that is foreseeably relevant for the administration of our domestic tax law. Information that is foreseeably relevant generally refers to information related to an ongoing investigation for non-compliance with tax laws. Stakeholders with whom the committee consulted raised some concern with what they felt was the imprecise nature of the term foreseeably relevant. This terminology, however, is central to the main aim of the Convention and is intended to provide for exchange of information in a broad manner, while at the same time preventing fishing expeditions or other similar things. So the committee thus preserved the terminology used in the Convention. Many of the things that are in these bills, Madam Speaker, spring directly from the Convention. Clause 9 of the bill addresses another core component related to the exchange of information, namely disclosure of confidential information. In recognition of the fact that the exchange of information for tax purposes will require institutions and the Board to access and disclose information that would normally be exempt under law, Clause 9 expressly provides that various sections in various laws, such as the Financial Institutions Act, that restrict the sharing of personal information would not prevent the disclosure of information by the Board or financial institution where that disclosure is in accordance with and for the purpose of giving effect to the tax convention. Together with this are additional safeguards, namely the requirement for the Board to keep any information it receives strictly confidential unless permitted to disclose that information under the legislation. And there is an offense for unauthorized disclosure of information obtained under the Act. This offense will carry with it a fine of $100,000 and imprisonment for 3 years on summary conviction, and an indictment, a fine of $150,000, imprisonment for 5 years. Clause 10 of the bill deals with exchange of information upon request. Pursuant to this clause, the Board of Inland Revenue is required to take all relevant measures to provide the competent authority of a requesting state with the information requested. utilizing the full extent of its information gathering powers under the law. Clause 11 of the bill deals with automatic exchange of information on an annual basis, just like FATCA. Clause 12 sets out reporting requirements of a reporting financial institution. The committee recommended the insertion of new subclauses 7, 8, and 9 to provide further clarity on the information to be collected and reported by institutions, financial institutions. Clause 12 requires a reporting financial institution to notify an account holder in respect of a reportable account that information related to that person, which is required to be reported, has been forwarded to the Board of Inland Revenue and will be sent to the competent authority of an applicant state. This, again, is similar to FATCA, so that persons will be told when their information is being sent to the Inland Revenue Division and transferred to the competent authority of another country in accordance with the legislation. This is to be made once by the 31st January in the calendar year following the first year information. Clause 13 of the bill sets out the grounds upon which spontaneous exchange of information can be conducted. And this is usually where the board has reasonable grounds to suspect there may be a loss of tax in another country or savings in tax in Trinidad and Tobago that would give rise to an increase in tax in another country. Clause 14 addresses the simultaneous exchange of tax information through the conduct of simultaneous tax examinations in 2 or more countries. Clause 15 sets out compliance and enforcement provisions. Clause 16 provides for collaboration between Inland Revenue and another competent authority to correct any errors or incomplete information that is exchanged. Clause 17 preserves the records. Clause 18 requires the Inland Revenue Division to notify the OECD Secretariat regarding any breach of confidentiality or failure of safeguards, as well as sanctions imposed and action taken. Clause 19 would require a reporting financial institution to use service providers or allow them to fulfill their reporting and due diligence obligations. The final part of the bill, Part 4, starts with Clause 20, which prevents an officer of the Board of Inland Revenue who properly discloses confidential information under the Act from being liable for any offense. Clause 21 requires the Minister of Finance to lay an annual report in Parliament on the operations of the Board of Inland Revenue in relation to the Act. Clause 22 authorizes the Minister of Finance to amend the schedules to the bill where necessary. Clause 23 allows the Minister to prescribe any date that must be prescribed. Clause 24 provides for the making of regulations, and Clause 25 provides for consequential amendments to existing legislation. In the 7 schedules of the bill, the first schedule is the common reporting standard, due diligence requirements. Second schedule is the competent authorities of all countries signed to the convention. Schedule 3 sets out the full text of the convention on mutual administrative assistance in tax matters. Schedule 4 sets out the state parties to the convention. Schedule 5 lists the jurisdictions undertaking first exchanges in 2017 and in 2018. And Trinidad and Tobago is among the jurisdictions committed to first exchange by 2018, but we didn't achieve that. Schedule 6 contains the model competent authority agreements, and Schedule 7 is consequential amendments. I now turn to another bill, Tax Information Exchange Agreements, the second bill. Members may recall the FATCA Act, as it is called. It repealed and replaced the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Act 1989. Since the 1918 Act was replaced with an act that treats only with agreements between Trinidad and Tobago and the United States of America, there's need to enact another piece of legislation that can apply to all other existing and potential treaty partners. The bill, Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018, therefore mirrors the 1989 Tax Information Exchange Agreement Act, and I want to stress this act was in force, has been in force for over 30 years in Trinidad and Tobago, but it has been updated to provide for exemptions from certain specified sections of the Data Protection Act, which came afterwards, as we also did with the USA FATCA Act. and to increase the penalties for unauthorized disclosure of information. This bill has 10 clauses, and your committee recommended the introduction of an 11th clause. Among significant amendments to the bill is an amendment to Clause 5 that provides that an order made by the President declaring that a tax information exchange agreement to be a declared agreement be laid in both houses of Parliament. An amendment is also proposed to Clause 6 of the bill to specify that the general directions that may be given to the board by the Minister of Finance do not include any directions relative to the personal information of any specific person within the possession of the board. I want to repeat that. The Minister of Finance will not be permitted to give directions to the Board of Inland Revenue relative to personal information of any specific person. And this is in response to concerns raised by stakeholders. Clause 6, in its current form, appeared in the repealed 1989 Tax Information Exchange Act, allowed for the minister to direct the board on matters relating solely to the effective implementation of declared agreements. And this did not in the past and will not now extend to any ability of the Minister of Finance to access secret and confidential information. And this is in fact prohibited by the Income Tax Act. However, notwithstanding all of that, notwithstanding all the safeguards, the committee recommended that an express provision be included in Clause 6, so it is now clear to all concerned that the minister will not be authorized to direct the board to provide him with any personal information that they hold on persons. Clause 7(1) of the bill, it is recommended be deleted, replaced with new subclauses 1, 2, and 3, 7, 1, 2, and 3. The original draft of Clause 7(1) came from the old 1989 Act, and the committee recommended that it be reworded for clarity. The effect was not altered, but it's much better worded now. It sets out the powers of the Board of Inland Revenue and allows the board to utilize its existing statutory powers for giving effect to a declared agreement. The new Clause 11 addresses the matter of notification by the board directly to the person affected, so that their personal information was reported, so to the effect that their personal information was reported under an agreement to the competent authority of a particular state. The pragmatism of notifications, as well as appropriate timelines for such, was a matter that was well ventilated before the committee. The committee recommends that such notification by the board shall be within 1 year following the provision of information to a competent authority of another state under a declared agreement. The final bill, and Madam Speaker, how many minutes do I have?
30605.
306?
6 past 3.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. So I have 14 minutes. The final bill in the package is the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019. On November 2nd, 2018, the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2018, now an act, was debated before this House. At that time, I provided a detailed account of the events leading up to this government's decision to introduce amendments to the Income Tax Act and explained at length the importance of the passage of such a bill to members opposite and the national community. One of the main aims at that time was to avoid potentially deleterious effects on Trinidad and Tobago's financial sector and the country as a whole, potential de-risking and other countermeasures as a result of Trinidad and Tobago failing to become compliant with Global Forum standards. The amendments in that bill in 2018 were aimed at not only addressing Global Forum commitments, but also our commitments to the Financial Action Task Force. On November 2nd, 2018, while an attempt was being made to get on with the enactment of this legislation, members opposite insisted that the work of the committee needed to continue based on a suggested amendment to one clause in the bill. In order to allow this to be considered, the bill was referred to a special select committee of the House to consider and report on the bill. This committee met twice, one of which was a public meeting. The committee heard representations from 25 important stakeholders, including His Excellency Arend B.C. Brock, the Ambassador of the European Union, representatives from the Bankers Association, the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, NAMLAC, the Inland Revenue Division, Financial Intelligence Unit, Financial Intelligence Branch of the Police Service, American Chamber of Commerce, and the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce. Very productive and wide-ranging discussions were held. During this public session, it was made clear that the main driver behind all of this global interest in tax transparency, the eradication of tax evasion and tax avoidance, and all the usual issues such as money laundering, terrorist financing, which arise out of a lack of transparency in tax matters. It was also made clear by the European Union to all present and the general public the consequences for not passing the 2018 bill. We were at risk then of being faced with defensive measures from European community members. These potential defensive measures included the termination of correspondent banking, the cessation of the supply of European notes to our central bank, the suspension of credit card transactions, and the suspension of money services such as Western Union and MoneyGram. We came back to this House in November 2018 to consider and debate the report of the Special Select Committee. I reported to this House on the outcome of the discussions, presented the committee's report for adoption. It was our hope then, having considered all the relevant matters and having heard from the stakeholders, that the 2018 bill would be enacted. Despite all of this, Madam Speaker, despite all the risks of defensive measures from European community members, members opposite withheld their support for the bill. As a result, in an effort to at least do something about our FATF commitments, the clauses of that 2018 bill, which required support of a 3/5 majority, were removed from the bill. The bill was then passed and is now law, and we pressed on. The provisions that were excised from the 2018 bill were incorporated into the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019, now before us in this report, and referred to the Joint Select Committee. Further discussions continue. However, as we had said, while the committee continued to do its work, members of the European Union made good on their promise. Trinidad and Tobago remains listed by the European Union as a non-cooperative jurisdiction for tax purposes. This listing is solely because Trinidad and Tobago has failed to comply with global forum standards. Individual European countries such as France, Netherlands, and Luxembourg have begun to exercise their option to apply defensive measures against Trinidad and Tobago. These measures include suspension of wire transfers to and from correspondent banks. Students who are studying in these countries have been prevented from opening bank accounts in European banks and have been subjected to enhanced due diligence. Nationals engaged in business transactions with European persons have encountered impediments to the transmission of funds. The impact of the delay in implementing these legislative changes has now gone from hypothetical, as we warned in November, to real, as we speak now in January 2020. Ordinary citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are now being impacted. And if we do not pass these bills today, Madam Speaker, these defensive measures will increase in severity. The international perception that has been created by the non-support of this legislation in the past, I hope we're talking about the past, is that Trinidad and Tobago is a jurisdiction that contributes to tax evasion and tax avoidance. Our international reputation has been damaged. And so, Madam Speaker, we are now here, over a year later, to once again seek support for the passage of these critical amendments to the Income Tax Act. This last bill, is a short bill with 8 clauses. The Joint Select Committee only recommended one minor amendment to Clause 5. For completeness, the bill will now insert into the Income Tax Act a new Section 4D, which will require the board or allow the board to provide taxpayer information that is foreseeably relevant to the administration of the domestic laws of another jurisdiction, with which there is an arrangement for double tax relief or exchange of information. notwithstanding the security provisions at Section 4 of the Income Tax Act. Amendments to Section 93 are proposed related to double taxation agreements. A new Section 93A would be inserted into the Income Tax Act by Clause 6 of the bill to exempt specified sections of the Data Protection Act. Finally, the bill provides for amendments to Section 117 and 117A of the Income Tax Act so that the powers of the board specified therein will be exercisable to give effect to the full range of legislation under the purview of the board. And Madam Speaker, before I close, I want to put into the record some notes of meetings of the committee that was appointed to consider and report on the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019, the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters 2018, and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018. On Monday, September 16, 2019, just a few months ago, during the committee's 9th meeting, members raised in the 4th session, members raised certain matters which required further clarification from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. During this meeting, the chairman, yours truly, advised members that he was desirous of laying the report of the committee during the sitting of the House of Representatives, which was scheduled for Friday, September 20th, 2019, pending the receipt of a response from the OECD on the issues raised by members. The responses from the OECD addressing these concerns were received by the Secretariat on Friday, September 20, 2019, and were forwarded to the members on the same day, along with the draft final report requesting comments and amendments. Shortly after that, correspondence was received from Senator Hossain on behalf of members Karim, Charles, and Hossain, raising concerns in relation to the final report. These concerns were in relation to the notification procedure for exchange of information on request or spontaneously, and the proposed exception to legal professional privilege as contained in the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill. A concern was also raised by independent Senator Sipasad in relation to the issue of legal professional privilege. As a result, since special majority is required, a decision was made by myself to save the work of the Joint Select Committee, carry forward the bills to the 5th session, the session we are now in, to allow further discussion on the issues identified, since September 20th was the last sitting day of the previous session. The bills were therefore carried forward to the 5th session on Friday, September 20, 2019. At its first meeting in the 5th session, held on Wednesday, November 6, 2019, the committee discussed the issues raised by Senator Hossain and Senator Sipasad at length. Some of the points raised by the committee during the discussion include, in relation to the notification procedure, the committee noted that under Clause 12 of the bill, a reporting financial institution, including a bank, is required to notify an account holder that information relating to that person has been reported to the board and will be exchanged with the competent authority of an applicant state. It was also noted that when dealing with criminal matters, there is no requirement for notification of an account holder, because such notification may thwart criminal investigations. In relation to legal professional privilege, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's representative at the meeting noted that this clause was a mandatory requirement in order to be compliant with OECD standards. We had asked this question several times of the OECD, and they said this was a non-negotiable requirement. The committee made specific reference to the OECD's response to concerns raised, which stated that jurisdictions were not required to provide information which would disclose information that is subject of attorney-client privilege. The committee reiterated that legal professional privilege does not apply when the committal of a criminal offense is involved. Ultimately, after wide discussion, the committee decided there will be no further amendments made to the bills. Thereafter, the final report of the committee was laid in the House of Representatives on Friday, November 22nd, 2019. I make these points, Madam Speaker, because I want to go back now in the few minutes available to me to make the point that We tried to get this legislation passed a long time ago. We told members opposite that if we did not, that members of the European Union would start to apply defensive measures against Trinidad and Tobago citizens. And that has happened. Defensive measures included suspension of wire transfers to and from correspondent banks. Students of Trinidad and Tobago citizens who are studying in European countries have been prevented from opening bank accounts. Nationals engaged in business transactions with European persons or companies have encountered difficulty to transmit funds, and it will get worse. And therefore, Madam Speaker, after all these years, after all this discussion in this Joint Select Committee, after all the consultations, after all the deliberations, after all the clarifications, it is my sincere hope that members opposite will support this bill so that we can avoid these increasingly dangerous defensive measures being placed on Trinidad and Tobago citizens by EU countries. I beg to move.
Honourable members, I will now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that this House adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018, the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018, and the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019 in the 5th Session, 11th Parliament. Member for Shagona cease.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to join this very significant debate, which to our mind has far-reaching consequences for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, many of the viewers and listeners of today's proceedings may be asking themselves a simple question: why are we here today? Madam Speaker, I wish to report to our citizens asking that valid question that the UNC, led by our distinguished leader, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, is here. One, to protect and defend the constitutional rights and interests. Two, to ensure that good legislation is passed to the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. And thirdly, to act as your voice, those of you who are listening and viewing, and hold this government to account for your tax dollars. Madam Speaker, today as a parliament we are here to debate and for the House to adopt the report of the Joint Select Committee, 5th Session, 11th Parliament, 2019-2020, on the following. Number one, the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Taxation Bill 2018. Secondly, the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018. And thirdly, the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, in the interest of time and focus, I propose to speak mostly on the Income Tax Amendment Bill, and my very capable colleague, the member for Naparima, will deal with the other two bills. My other colleague as well will deal with other matters as we continue this very important debate this evening. So Naparima will deal with my colleague on the Joint Select Committee, who I want to say that I want to express my gratitude and my thanks to our political leader for appointing us on this committee together with Senator Saddam Hussein. And when I conclude, I will give some remarks about the level of contribution which the members of the opposition made. Madam Speaker, the opposition is looking on, the nation is looking on together with the opposition and asking what is the relevance of these three pieces of legislation. How will these three pieces of legislation affect the man in the street? Madam Speaker, the truth of the matter is that Trinidad and Tobago, as you will have heard many times in various places, operates within a global political and economic framework. The external geopolitical systems are demanding increased levels of access to information on citizens' financial and tax affairs to, number one, conduct unfair tax competition and control that to see how that is happening. Secondly, to strengthen cross-border tax compliance. Thirdly, to prevent money laundering. And fourthly, counter terrorism financing, as we have been told. And fifthly, to combat the local and transnational criminal enterprises. Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, as a global partner, is therefore required to comply with the mandates handed down by the Global Forum, the United States of America, the European Union, and other agencies. Madam Speaker, in fact, the June 2016 Mutual Evaluation Report, which was mentioned before, for Trinidad and Tobago on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing measures, stated that Trinidad and Tobago would have had some robust legislation to deal with some of these matters. And these did not start today. They predate us in terms of the year 2000 with respect to the Proceeds of Crime Act. And many of those clauses found in there also found themselves as recommendation in the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, which was cited in the same June 2016 Mutual Evaluation Report. Madam Speaker, we would have heard from the Honourable Member for Ligomata Northeast, Minister of Finance, and we have not only heard from him today about matters like these, but in previous incarnations as well. But on those occasions, I just want to remind all of us, as we start and we continue to debate these three pieces of legislation, what the member for Ligomata Northeast would have said on Friday, the 18th of August 2000. He said, I have difficulty, Mr. Speaker. We on this side have a difficulty. We could not stay here whole night and argue clause by clause against this bill. There are certain questions of fundamental rights that have to be looked at. Rights to property, rights to privacy. And Madam Speaker, these are the very same rights which we are making reference to. It is one thing when you're in opposition, like they were there at that time, to talk about fundamental or constitutional rights, about the rights to property and privacy. But when you're in government, sometimes you tend to forget what you say. Madam Speaker, while I make reference, and we are talking currently today about these three bills, I also want to place on record that what we have heard time and again, ad nauseum, is the whole aspect of blame. We are here today and we are being reminded, Madam Speaker, that these pieces of legislation were there for a very long time and they should have been dealt with. But I want to also place on record, Madam Speaker, reference has been made before now about Mr. Larry Hawaii and the period of time of 2010-2015, but Mr. Hawaii would have been there impacting upon these legislation that we are now faced with, particularly from the period of time 2014. And therefore, Madam Speaker, I think it's important for me to read the chronology, with your permission, so that persons listening will get an appreciation and an understanding as to the sequence of events and the years that we would have gone through to bring us to this point. Madam Speaker, what are the facts then? In October 2014, former Minister of Finance Larry Hawaii, and let me say as well that we are very happy, and I am particularly pleased and privileged to have been worked with Minister Hawaii then, who is a very competent, capable, and outstanding Minister of Finance. Minister Larry Hawaii committed Trinidad and Tobago to the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes and gave a timeline. I want to repeat this. Minister Hawaii is the one that gave a timeline of September 2017 for the first automatic exchange of information. Madam Speaker, let me also place on record that, and I recall this from my stint in the Parliament, from the Cabinet, that Minister Hawaii would have visited Berlin towards the end of 2014 and would have requested the period of time of up to 2017 to have this legislation implemented, and certainly with respect to Global Forum. It was Minister Hawaii who presented the case for the government of Trinidad and Tobago at that time and was given approval. He was given approval by the Global Forum. In fact, his presentation was so well received that Minister Hawaii was asked to make a presentation to the Global Forum on the challenges of small states with respect to implementing this legislation. I want to also state for the facts that when we talk about where we are today, the facts, we are saying that all of these matters were there long before. But I think it is important, as I gave the 2014 for me to give the chronology. It is important because, you see, Madam Speaker, persons may come after me when I am completed my presentation and may want to attack what we are saying, but I want to give the facts of these matters to be placed on the Hansard. And therefore, I would have spoken about 2014. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I now want to go to September the 9th, 2016. In a parliamentary debate, the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, admitted that soon after he was sworn in as minister, he was aware of the timeline that was put in place for compliance by the Global Forum. That was what you would have said. You said, I am quoting what you said in 2016, but you indicated as well that in 2015, well, if you go back 2015, you're now saying that even before this time, you would have known about it. And the question is, what did you do about it? In April 2017, the PNM government signed on to a fast-track process, which was designed to report on the progress made by Trinidad and Tobago in terms of passing the necessary legislation to meet the obligations of the Global Forum. In June 28, 2017, the OECD published the results of the fast-track review process, in which Trinidad and Tobago was deemed to remain non-compliant, as it was unable to demonstrate progress to warrant any upgrade of its ratings. Madam Speaker, I'm reading basically in the current period. The government, after being fully aware of the results of the fast-track review, which was published internationally, did absolutely nothing to address the deficiencies and caused Trinidad and Tobago to be placed on a blacklist by the European Union. On May 28, 2018 now, in a further demonstration of the government's ineptitude and negligence, it was almost 1 year later, May 28, 2018, that the government introduced these bills to the Parliament for consideration in an attempt to move Trinidad and Tobago from the blacklist. Madam Speaker, I now go to August 2018. The government, which is responsible for scheduling meetings of the Joint Select Committee, met on the 6th of June 2018 and did not schedule any meetings for a period of 10 weeks. And then met on Tuesday, the 21st of August 2018 and Wednesday, the 29th of August 2018. All 3 meetings lasted approximately 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is totally inadequate to complete the deliberations of this bill. Madam Speaker, I have a letter in my possession written by my colleague, the member for Naparima, and he was writing to the Secretary of the Joint Select Committee, indicating that that meeting, and let me just read with your permission, I write on behalf of members, MP Fazal Karim, Senator Saddam Hussein, and myself. to indicate our deep concern. You see, I'm reading this, Madam Speaker, and I'm making reference to this. Because what has been presented to us is that we did nothing when we were there, and we allowed these things to lapse. And therefore, I'm saying, if you did not and you were so cautious, and you were moving in such a fast track, how come you did not meet and we had to write to ask for meetings? Madam Speaker, I want to tell you the date of this letter is May the 9th, 2019. Addressed to the Secretary of the Joint Select Committee. I write on behalf, as I indicated that before, and myself, I called the names before, to indicate our deep concern about the fact that since its establishment, only one meeting of the Joint Select Committee on the Mutual Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018 and the Tax Information Exchange Agreements Bill 2018 and the Income Tax Bill has been held. The meeting was held on January 25th, 2019. 3 months have since passed. We note that the legislation under review are vitally important in order for us to come off the various blacklists. We confess that we are not seeing the level of urgency commensurate with the importance of the proposed legislation. My colleague continues, it is our hope that we will see a number of meetings being urgently convened so that the requisite analysis of the bills will take place to prevent us being called upon to support inadequately reviewed and not well thought out legislation. Respectfully, Rodney Charles, MP for Naparima. Madam Speaker, I now go to November the 2nd, a day that was just mentioned by the member for the Gomate Northeast. November the 2nd, 2018, after the Joint Select Committee report was debated in the House on the 2nd of November 2018, in which the opposition noticed serious concerns with the legislation, the government undertook to write to the opposition, but did not do so until 10 days after, on the 12th of November 2018, under the hand of the Minister of Finance. We consider this, and I consider this, Madam Speaker, hypocritical of the government to claim the bill is at an impasse and lament that they must have this report to the Global Forum on the 20th to the 22nd of November 2018 and see FATF on 19th to the 23rd of November 2018 when they adjourned the Parliament to the 23rd of November after the Global Forum meeting and on the last day, the CFATF meeting to deal with what? The income tax bill. Madam Speaker, we on this side said, you are bringing one bill. You are required to bring all 3 together. Had you bring all 3 together, we would have passed them, we would not have to be here, and all of these things about the blacklist would have been dealt with long ago. Madam Speaker, the opposition in its minority position, which comprised submissions with myself, the member for Naparima, and Senator Saddam Hussein, the opposition in its minority position listed 3 issues which I want to make reference to. Number 1, the lack of judicial scrutiny. Secondly, data protection issues, which is the privacy rights, and the application of the bill to all citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and not EU citizens. We reiterate that any amendment, and this is what we said to the committee, any amendment to the Income Tax Act will have legal implications and consequences that will affect the Anti-Terrorism Act, that will affect the Proceeds of Crime Act, that will affect the Mutual Administrative Assistance in Tax Matters Bill 2018 and the Tax Information Exchange Bill Agreement 2018. All of these bills are interrelated, which the Minister of Finance has admitted. Madam Speaker, as I continue, I think it is important for us to lay the records. And I want to also present, and I'm reading this document that is provided as part of the final report here, which is before us. It is an attachment from the Ministry of Finance Global Forum Status Update. And I read, that because we seem to believe that there's only these 3 items, and I want to show, and we must advise the national community, that it is not only these 3 bills, and there are certain contingencies that must be fulfilled before we get off the blacklist. And I think it's important that we get that information correct. What was completed so far? The summary of status as of June 2019, Trinidad and Tobago, completed Companies Amendment Act 2019. Drafted legislation to meet 2 international standards, EOR and the EOI, the Automatic Exchange of Information, to allow Trinidad and Tobago to sign on to the convention. Drafted amendments to the Income Tax Act to address other global forum concerns. We prepared draft protocols. Started developing administrative procedures, which was referred to just now by the Honourable Minister, and processes. And considering the information technology infrastructure, which I'm going to make reference to, and I'm going to read that very shortly. Madam Speaker, some of the things that still need to be addressed. The deficiencies outlined in the Phase 1 report. Our commitment to implement the AEOI and getting acceptance to sign and implement the convention. Madam Speaker, and I read from this document which is supplied to us in this report, it should be noted that the items to be addressed require the enacting of the legislation before the Parliament. Also note, we are being told that the legislation by itself, and I want to repeat, the legislation by itself does not guarantee full compliance with the international standards, since the Phase 2 peer review will consider the effectiveness of exchange of information in practice, similar to what obtains in FATF under AML CFT reviews. When the legislation is enacted, Trinidad and Tobago, and I think the Honourable Minister in fairness to him alluded to this, Trinidad and Tobago will be required to put the administrative and IT infrastructure in place only when these systems are operational for a period of time can they be reviewed and effectiveness determined. Having the legislative framework is the first and major step in moving Trinidad and Tobago from the current non-compliant rating to compliant rating. And therefore, okay.
Package of legislation, yes or no?
Where that come from?
Where that come from?
Madam Speaker, I don't know we have reached the voting stage yet. Madam Speaker, I think it is important for us to also understand that there are certain timelines that need to be followed.
What time is your flight?
I want to, well, I'll talk about that just now. I think there are certain things that we need to have placed in front of us in terms of legislation and which need to be completed. We'll have had the Income Tax Amendment Bill before us now. But there are other matters. The Double Taxation Agreement Bill 2017, before the GSC, did not meet the deadline, not met. The Companies Amendment Bill 2017, June 30th, 2019 would have been deadline, not lead in Parliament. Mutual assistance in tax matters, well, we have that before us now. And the BEPS, which is the Base Erosion and Profit Sharing, June 30th, 2019, not lead in Parliament. Madam Speaker, I think what is also important for us is to indicate that the committee of which I was a member, and again, I am saying that we are very proud to have done this work because we work diligently, we work as a team. And what is important is that we should let the country know. If nobody else will tell the country, we must tell the country what we would have done in terms of the various sessions. The committee spanned 3 sessions of Parliament, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th sessions. And there are various reports that we would have presented and would have been presented to us. But you know, sometimes, Madam Speaker, we are told that much has to be done in a very short period of time. And one of the things that is very important is what do we do within the time frame that we have? And now that we are debating these three pieces of legislation, what do we do in terms of ensuring that we have this reciprocity, this effective and efficient reciprocity of the exchange of information? Madam Speaker, what is most regrettable is that the original list of 17 non-cooperative jurisdictions in 2017 had decreased to just 8. Some of these jurisdictions with a population of 20,000 are now off of that list. Small countries as they were. Some people may say, well, that is very easy to get off the list. But we had sufficient time. We are now going into the 5th year, and we are at this position debating these three pieces of legislation, which should have been done quite a while now, and you recognize that it was very late in coming. Madam Speaker, my colleague will make reference to some of the matters with respect to CARICOM. All I will say, Madam Speaker, we were told in the meeting, and in one meeting in particular, when we asked about the CARICOM's position, that a delegation from CARICOM was going to meet with the Global Forum. But guess what? That delegation did not comprise Trinidad and Tobago. But my colleague Naparima will indicate that, and I'm sure the Minister of Finance, chairman as he was, of that committee, did in fact bring a document to us, and we lamented the fact that we should have been on that committee, and I know that he said he would have made some representation. Had we gone to that committee, it may have made a big difference. I think, Madam Speaker, what I want to do is to also indicate, many people would have been hearing about this Global Forum. I think it's important for us to understand what the Global Forum is, and especially those who will be looking on the television and listening. And maybe I should just give some brief points about the Global Forum, some of which may have been made by the member for the Gomati Northeast. But the Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes is the multilateral framework within which work on the transparency and exchange of information for tax purposes has been carried out by both the OECD and non-OECD economies and countries since 2000. Reference should have been made to its restructuring in 2009. The Global Forum has become the key international body working on the implementation of the international standards on tax transparency. Yes, that may have been made reference to. Yes, it is in the report. But many persons who are hearing this for the first time, because they may not have been aware as to what this is all about. The Global Forum ensures that these high standards of transparency and exchange of information for tax purposes are in place around the world through its monitoring and peer review exercises. In order to ensure a worldwide participation in the benefits of increased tax transparency and international cooperation, and in order to ensure that developing countries benefit from the new tax transparent environment, the Global Forum has a technical assistance program for its members. There are two, Madam Speaker, internationally agreed standards on exchange of information for tax purposes. And I think this is very important as well for all of us and for the national community to get an appreciation as to how this Global Forum interacts with us in Trinidad and Tobago, and with particular reference to the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019. The two internationally agreed standards on exchange of information for tax purposes are: one, the exchange of information on request, abbreviated EOIR, and the automatic exchange of information, the AEOI. The Global Forum, Madam Speaker, currently has 158 members participating on an equal footing, together with 15 international organizations participating as observers. All member jurisdictions have committed to implementing the international standard on EOIR. The Global Forum conducts rigorous assessments of compliance with this standard according to the elements set out in its terms of reference. Madam Speaker, the implementation of these international standards significantly contributes to the fight against tax evasion, as well as achieving greater international cooperation and enhance transparency of corporate bodies, arrangements, and financial information. Madam Speaker, I now want to turn very briefly to some of the important aspects of the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, the Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019, which is before us, and which should have been here a long time now, as we would have been told for many years, these matters have been dealt with. This amendment, this Income Tax Amendment Bill 2019, comprises 8 clauses. So if you did some arithmetic basically, and we have 4 years ago that we are here, it practically took 2 years. 2 years a clause, in a sense, so that you would have done 8 clauses, and if you have 2 years per clause, by 4 years you would have completed. If you would have done 1 clause or 2 clauses, as you go incrementally, we would have completed all of these matters long before today. Madam Speaker, I just want to indicate we were still on the blacklist. I would have been off that blacklist, and the people and the country of Trinidad and Tobago would have been in a better position based on our contribution that we would have been making. Madam Speaker, I just want to give some brief highlights. Clause 4 of the bill was introduced after Section 4C. Basically, it is empowering the Board of Inland Revenue to provide taxpayer information to a foreign tax administration authority for the administration and enforcement of the domestic laws of another jurisdiction with which there is an agreement for double taxation relief or exchange of information in relation to taxes.
Honorable Member for Shimona cease. Your original speaking time is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes, though, I know. You may proceed.
Madam Speaker, as I continue to give some very brief highlights of these clauses, Clause 5 would seek, as we have been told, to amend Section 93(1) of the Act to include a new paragraph which would provide for the arrangements for double taxation to be entered into by Trinidad and Tobago with the government of another country. Basically, it has to do with the sharing of information, and we were advised in the committee meetings that there were about in excess of 13 or to 17 countries that we had to sign double taxation agreements with on an individual basis. Clause 6 recognizes that there are several secrecy provisions under the Data Protection Act which would prevent the sharing of information in the possession of the board. The Data Protection Act also restricts how information collected can be used and prevents the sharing with countries which do not have equivalent safeguards. In this regard, there are a number of provisions that were made with respect to the Data Protection Act, which is modeled after Section 12 of the FATCA. And some of those that were referred to deal with Section 6 of the Data Protection Act in terms of general principle of privacy. Section 38, the use of personal information without the consent of a person. Section 40, processing of sensitive information without consent. Section 30, collection of personal information. Section 31, again, that deals with collection of personal information. And Section 46, disclosure of persons' information outside Trinidad and Tobago without consent. Madam Speaker, we consider these to be very important. Clause 7 of the amendment bill deals with the tax information with the United States of America, where the bill will amend Section 117A, 117A of the Act. Section 117A was introduced as a consequential amendment to the Tax Information Exchange of the United States of America. Madam Speaker, the final clause in the bill, Clause 8, would amend again Section 117A of the Act. The OECD is of the view that double taxation agreements do not fall into the category of other enactments for a similar purpose, and it is very necessary, therefore, to amend the section to allow double taxation agreements. Madam Speaker, these are some of the highlights of the things that we would have witnessed in the committee. But I think it is important for me to indicate that there were some concerns that members of the committee expressed. And among the concerns we saw coming out in terms of the discussions were that there were fundamental issues involved in the Act. Issues of privacy, as I mentioned, property, sovereignty, international relations, and the right to due process. Madam Speaker, we would have made mention of some of these before, and therefore I need not repeat them. However, what I wanted to refer to is the fact that we would have been advised and we would have discussed in the committee stage as well some of the consequences of non-compliance, among which would have been a result in the severe compromise of correspondent banking relationships, international trading relationships, increased risk of enhanced due diligence, resultant reputation risk, all of these. And I want to say that members of the committee, the members of the opposition on this committee, we worked very much together and hand in hand to ensure that as far as possible, all our matters that we raised would have been taken into consideration and would have been given some level of response. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to mention some of the areas in which there was some level of debate, deliberations, and discussions with the with committee members at that stage. What we would have done, I'm just trying to locate it here. What we would have done is to itemize some of the areas that we agreed with, some of which we were not able to agree, some of which we would have been told that these matters we could not have gone into much debate and discussion because they were in fact agreed to and they were requirements of the Global Forum, and therefore there wasn't much that we could have done in that case. But as far as possible, Madam Speaker, we would have been able to do as best as we can. Madam Speaker, I just wanted to read some of the areas that we would have done. Some work with, we would have been able to at least assist in the deliberations after presenting the minority report. But not being able to locate some of those, I will leave some of that for my colleague when he is making his contribution on this matter. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I just wish to thank our political leader for, as I indicated, nominating our members on the opposition, Honorable Rodney Charles, Senator Saddam Hussein, and myself. And here I want to make special mention of the amount of work that was done by Senator Saddam Hussein, and we commend him for supporting our committee in a very significant way. Madam Speaker, our esteemed leader of the opposition, political leader and member for Siparia, has said ad nauseum that we on this side will support good legislation. We will support good law in the interest of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We will support good law when they further progress, prosperity, and the well-being of our citizens. We will support good law when they promote the welfare of our country. However, Madam Speaker, we will not support laws that denies our citizens their fundamental rights, freedoms, and privileges as enshrined in our Constitution. We will not support laws that interferes with the sovereignty of our country. We will not support laws that place at risk the lives, property, and privacy of our people. And in so doing, we will not be rushed or ambushed into passing legislation that are politically expedient. We will not be bullied by those opposite. And we abhor the malicious untruths emanating from members of the government who seek to malign and destroy the character of and integrity of persons without just cause, of innocent members on this side. And most of all, we will not be intimidated by your vile threats, such as you made last week in this house, which is on the Hansard. We on this side will stand strong behind our leader as we do our country's business. People are suffering all over this country. And these laws, we have to make sure that we tell the country the truth. We give all the facts. There's a report here, and my colleague will speak in more detail about the two other pieces of legislation. People have said increasingly how they are fed up, and they demonstrated this on the 2nd of December 2019. Madam Speaker, we are at this point in time, as I indicated, we are here, we have made our contribution, we have done our best in this committee, and we want to make sure that everything that we do will be in the best interest of our country, our nation, and its future. And you ask us how we'll do this. It is simple. It is simple in a few words. The PNM talks, the UNC works. Let's get this nation working again. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I will do a very unusual thing at this moment and ask my friend, the first responder for the opposition, standing behind his leader, a very simple question which I will give way to. Are you supporting this package of legislation?
Member for Naparimo. Member for Naparimo.
Thank you, Madam
Please,
Speaker.
let's don't have any more words.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You see, I've started off in a very simple way with a very direct question to someone who I find unrecognizable today intellectually. Because I am at a loss that after 45 minutes and 9 years, let me repeat that, 45 minutes and 9 years, we having embarked on this journey in 2011, that the member for Chaguanas East cannot answer a simple question as the first responder for the opposition as to whether they support the legislation or not. And Madam Speaker, let me now treat with what I consider to be gross misrepresentations on the record of this Parliament. Madam Speaker, we are here to debate 3 pieces of law under a motion. The 3 pieces of law, quite simply, are a Tax Information Exchange Act, a bill that is to be treated with amendments to the Income Tax Act, that's bill number 2, and the third one is to treat with a multilateral convention on mutual administrative assistance in tax matters. 3 bills. Madam Speaker, the first point of reference is that the commitment to the Global Forum journey began in 2011 under then Prime Minister, the member for Siparia. The simple position is that in 2011, Trinidad and Tobago underwent a Pair 1 review. What is the Global Forum, Madam Speaker? The Global Forum is a connection of countries put together to undertake a mutual arrangement where they assess each other and agree effectively, all 160 countries, and then their participating members as well, the 19 participating members, they agree to undergo a process of Pair 1 review, where they come and check each other and say, look, do you have laws to treat with tax transparency? Do you have laws to treat with tax evasion? Will you allow those laws to reach to foreign bank accounts? They check in Pair 1 if you have compliance, and then Pair 2 review is simply where they come to look at, are you effectively implementing the laws that you have? The Global Forum says, after your Pair 1 review, you will then graduate to a Pair 2 review. And Madam Speaker, what is of material note is that Trinidad and Tobago received its Pair 1 report, Pair 1 Pair Review Phase 1 report, coming from the OECD. It's entitled Global Forum on Transparency and Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes, Peer Review Report, Phase 1, Legal and Regulatory Framework, Trinidad and Tobago. It's a publication by the OECD. It's dated January 2011, reflecting the legal and regulatory framework of Trinidad and Tobago. And here, Madam Speaker, is what the OECD had to tell us. Trinidad and Tobago, and I quote from page 8 at paragraph 8, Trinidad and Tobago does not have in place elements which are crucial to achieving an effective exchange of information and therefore will not move to phase 2 review until it has acted on recommendations contained in this report to achieve an improved legal and regulatory framework. Trinidad and Tobago's position will be reviewed when it provides a detailed written report to peer review group within 12 months of the adoption of this report. Let me repeat this. Let me put it simply. The OECD came to the member for Siparia's government, the Honorable Kamla Prasad Bisesa, the member for Siparia, handed them a written report at page 8, paragraph 8, which said, you have failed Peer 1. You cannot go into the phase 2 reporting until you have improved your legal and regulatory framework within 12 months from the date of this report. What is the date of this report? January 2011. Madam Speaker, it then goes on to say that Trinidad and Tobago, and it checklists all of the things to be done, must undertake the reforms before they can go into phase 2. I had to listen, and the country had to listen through you, to the member for Chaguanas East. Read out, uncharacteristic for the honorable member was two things. Number one, he didn't mention Singapore once. And number two, the honorable member had to read out the insults about being bullied, etc. He was actually reading his table of insults. Both two very uncharacteristic things for the honorable member for Chaguanas East. So 12 months from January 2011, the honorable member for Siparia presided over a government that did absolutely nothing to allow Trinidad and Tobago to come into position. And as I hear the babbling coming across the floor from the classic babbler herself, Madam Speaker, 2011 went to 2012, 2013, 2014. Madam Speaker, could you assist me?
Did nothing.
No, the babbler is Siparia.
But all members, please abide by Standing Order 53. And Attorney General, I think we could find another word to describe what you see as interference.
I meant the babbling of a brook, the noise of water that distracts you constantly, where there's no substance in it. But anyway, Madam Speaker, 2011 went to 12, 13, 14, 15. All that happened in the UNC's tenure was that the Minister of Finance, Larry Hawaii, was happy to jump on a plane October 2014, get to Berlin, and then commit to do something. Madam Speaker, let me tell you what the deadline committed to for Trinidad and Tobago by Minister Hawaii, not by himself, but by two cabinet notes under the hand of the member for Siparia as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago was. The deadline for compliance with the Global Forum was September 2015.
15, not 17.
September 2015, Minister Hawaii and the member for Siparia presiding over the cabinet told the world that Trinidad and Tobago will have full compliance by September 2015. You know when that deadline was? This Minister of Finance had to enter into government on the 9th of September. 11th of September, I apologize. And he had 2 weeks
to write the letter.
Let me tell you what the 2 weeks was for, because let me tie it into this debate. The 2 weeks was to pass the multilateral convention legislation. The 2 weeks was to pass the amendments to the Income Tax Act. The 2 weeks was to pass the tax information exchange legislation. The 2 weeks was to negotiate 13 double taxation relief treaties with 13 different countries. So when I hear the unrecognizable contribution coming from the unrecognizable member for Chaguanas East today, Madam Speaker, I am shocked and alarmed that my colleague could stand up here and misrepresent the truth to Trinidad and Tobago in the manner that he has. So, Madam Speaker, I would like to know where in the wild imagination of the UNC, a Minister of Finance with responsibility for the Global Forum is supposed to pass 3 pieces of law, negotiate 13 double taxation relief treaties, implement the reporting standards, and, Madam Speaker, it's worse than that, because the Phase 2 review means you actually have to be complying with automatic exchange of information upon request, automatic exchange of information generally, exchange of information simultaneously, and exchange of information, Madam Speaker, spontaneously. 4 forms of exchange of information. This Minister of Finance, between September 11th, 2015, and 2 weeks after that, to the end of September, this Minister of Finance and this government, in the wild imagination of the member for Siparia and the colleagues that sit opposite us, was supposed to have ensured that the Board of Inland Revenue, as the competent authority for the automatic exchange on request, simultaneous or spontaneously, that Board of Inland Revenue was supposed to be giving information.
And they had 4 years to do that.
What was worse than that is that the country will remember that apart from completely failing and putting Trinidad and Tobago into jeopardy, the member for Siparia, apart from completely doing that in relation to the Global Forum, there were 2 other nuclear devices set off. Number 1 was FATCA, which required us to implement the intergovernmental model between the United States and Trinidad and Tobago, again by 2015, and Siparia's government, the honorable member's government, did absolutely nothing on that. And worse than that, Madam Speaker, the honorable member for Siparia committed Trinidad and Tobago to undergo the 4th round mutual evaluation for the Financial Action Task Force in January 2015, and guess what happened? We failed every single item on that desk. So, Madam Speaker, I surely cannot accept today anything that the honorable member for Chaguanas East had to read out uncharacteristically today. It is untrue. It is a gross misrepresentation of the timeline, and I condemn my learned friend, because he is my friend. He's unrecognizable today. I condemn that contribution coming from the member opposite. Terrible. Madam Speaker, I had to listen to my friend, the member for Chaguanas East, talk in a most churlish and childish fashion, saying, Madam Speaker, they had to amend the Income Tax Act. Madam Speaker, 4 years later, 8 clauses. They did 2 clauses a year. Madam Speaker, my honorable friend couldn't be serious. Madam Speaker, let me remind the country about the Income Tax Act. Madam Speaker, we drafted an Income Tax Amendment Act in 2018 to achieve 2 purposes. Number 1, to achieve compliance with the Financial Action Task Force review, and number 2, to achieve compliance with the Global Forum. 2 things that we did. We came to this Parliament with a 3/5 majority bill. The 3/5 majority bill had 2 aspects of it. 1, to cause an exception to the Data Protection Act, and the second, to cause an amendment to the secrecy provisions in Section 4. In that bill, we had something that mortified the UNC. We had the ability to have the Financial Investigation Branch, the Inland Revenue, and the FIU have access to taxpaying information for criminal investigation. The member for Siparia, hopping up and down, objected to the law, said there's no way they want to get your taxpaying accounts, they want to get your accounts, refused to support the law. As Attorney General, knowing that we had to pass the law for the Financial Action Task Force, I asked the permission of the Honorable Prime Minister and my colleagues to strip down the legislation from a 3/5 majority bill into a simple majority bill. And much to their utter shock, we saved the criminal investigation simple majority work. We passed that into law, Madam Speaker, by way of an Act of Parliament in 2018. And Madam Speaker, you know what was lifted out of that bill? What was lifted out of that bill, Madam Speaker, was the 8 clauses. The 8 clauses that my honorable colleague from Chaguanas East today makes a mockery of. Those 8 clauses, Madam Speaker, the worst point in that is that the 8 clauses were a replica of the versions coming from the FATCA legislation. Let me repeat that. They were a replica of the law that we amended by way of consequential amendment in the FATCA legislation. So, Madam Speaker, the truth be told, it was the UNC that refused to pass the law in 2018. It was the UNC that insisted we strip out the special majority clauses. It was the UNC that I wrote to, and Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance, by way of letter February 8, 2019, I wrote the letter, settled it for the Minister of Finance. We wrote to the Honorable Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa, SC, MP, setting out what was in the Income Tax Amendment Bill, highlighting in red for the Honorable Member the 8 clauses that we had to strip out, pointing out to the Honorable Member for Siparia that these laws were the same as the FATCA law. And you know what we were met with? Absolutely no response. Senior Counsel, Member for Siparia, had no response. And today, in a written speech prepared for the Member for Chaguanas East, he has the temerity to say that we took 8 years to do 8 clauses, or 4 years to do 8 clauses. That is what you honestly said? Madam Speaker, let's get down to the clauses today. When we look to the Income Tax Amendment Act, Madam Speaker, let me tell you what has changed in the Income Tax Amendment Act. Permit me to put this on record. Let me show you the hard work and the teamwork that the UNC held hands on, and that they should be praised for today, that the Member for Chaguanas East boasts about so blatantly today. Madam Speaker, here are the amendments to the Income Tax Amendment Act. It's at page 225 of the report. First column, clause 5. Second column, extent of amendments. Delete paragraph B and C and renumber accordingly. That's it. No, let's suppose paragraph B and C is 10 pages long. Let's suppose that. Let's get to what the Act actually says, the bill. The hard work and the 4 years and the 2 clauses a year. Nonsense from the Member for Chaguanas East. Hear what clause 5 has to say. This is paragraph B and C that deleted. Paragraph B, by inserting after the word "that country" the words "for the receipt and sharing of information relative to such arrangements," and paragraph C, in paragraph A, by deleting the words semicolon or and substituting the word semicolon. Those 2 powerful clauses were deleted by the Honorable Member for Chaguanas East, the Member for Naparima. I mean, G's and ages, Madam Speaker. Come on, Madam Speaker. Under instructions from Siparia today, who can't tell her team whether they're supporting or not, yet 9 years later, Madam Speaker, we have to listen to that contribution from that Honorable Member? Take out a semicolon. Nuclear epic amendments to the Income Tax Amendment Act. The very same clauses that they refused to support under Siparia's direction in 2018, my honorable colleague gets set up so today? Because that had to be the best setup of the year, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what panics the UNC so desperately about foreign bank accounts? What panics the UNC so desperately in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15 that they did nothing? What panics Siparia as the leader of that honorable bench in 2011, jump now to 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, that the nuclear amendment for my honorable colleagues opposite is delete a semicolon. I mean, come on, Madam Speaker, where do you draw the line for the people of Trinidad and Tobago? Madam Speaker, I am shocked. I am sure. You think I saw you so? Reading insults from a piece of paper, Madam Speaker? My colleague tells me he didn't see me so. Today is the day you get soaked when you talk nonsense. Today is the day you call a spade a spade. Madam Speaker, let me put for Trinidad and Tobago, let me put, as Naprima say, coming after me. If I'm afraid of anything Naprima has to say, I ain't afraid lie, I ain't afraid makeup, I ain't afraid anything, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, let's put this into context today. What are the concepts? Madam Speaker, I need to declare something. I have a child, 2, at university abroad, one of whom is in the United Kingdom and cannot open a bank account. So I declare my interest in this debate. Madam Speaker, cannot open a bank account because under the pre-Brexit positions EU, we have not complied with the law. Blacklisted. Can't open a bank account. So, Madam Speaker, I've declared that interest. Madam Speaker, when we look to the reports, and Madam Speaker, I have over 1,000 pages of reports in here. Let me tell you, that's from the session in the 3rd session of Parliament, the 4th session of Parliament, the 5th session of Parliament. I attended all the meetings. Madam Speaker, I want to pay a compliment today to the Chief Parliamentary Council team and the Office of the Attorney General team, who sat down there and swallowed their reflex actions at the nonsense that passed for interrogation of this legislation. Because I just read out to you, Madam Speaker, Clause 5, Income Tax Amendment Act, delete 5, B, and C. The nuclear device in subsection C was a semicolon, right? So we understand that we had to wait 9 years to delete a semicolon. We understand that now. But when you look to the comparative matrices produced by Ms. Ida Eversley, Deputy Chief Parliamentary Counsel, which effectively is just repeating what the OECD put in the model bills alongside what we have proposed. In other words then, Madam Speaker, we could literally have just read from the right hand and read from the left hand. Everything is exactly as it was put forward. Madam Speaker, the consequence of not passing this law is chaos. And I explained to the population in 2017 when we were trying to pass. Madam Speaker, I explained to the population through you that when we were looking at the FATCA legislation, I begged the member for Caroni Central, literally begged the member for Caroni Central, not to insist upon repealing the Tax Information Exchange Act of 1989. Why? That honorable member was a member of the NAR government in 1989. That honorable member passed that Tax Information Exchange Act. That honorable member saw the IGA, the Intergovernmental Agreement 1989 for the United States of America. I warned the UNC, begged them as Attorney General. I said, please do not repeal this law because the Tax Information Exchange Act is a bucket. You can take any tax treaty, any intergovernmental treaty, for instance, this multilateral treaty that we're doing today, you can put that inside the bucket and pass it. Madam Speaker, let me tell you where we are on that one. Here it is. The FATCA legislation is Act number 4 of 2017. An act to repeal the Tax Information Exchange Agreement Act and replace it with the Tax Information Exchange Agreements United States of America Act. I beg the Parliament, I beg the UNC, beg them that being aware of the Global Forum catastrophe under Siparia's hand, I said we are going to need the Tax Information Exchange Act to bring the Global Forum compliance into compliance. Begged. It's on the Hansard record. Madam Speaker, when we look to the bill before us now, as this motion seeks to be adopted as amended, Madam Speaker, the Tax Information Exchange Act has been brought back. We are in effect, Madam Speaker, reenacting the Tax Information Exchange Act number 30 of 1989 almost verbatim today. Had we not repealed that act as I begged, but back then Siparia was no support, the sky is not going to fall, she was calling us chicken little, we introduced the concept of death by 1,000 cuts, but no, senior counsel from Siparia knows better than everybody else, and today this motion to adopt the second bill is in effect to put back the same law that we repealed. And there's my friend for Chaguanas East telling me, years to pass it, the government did nothing. The government was compelled to ask you for your support, and you refused to give it. And so we entered into an exercise of legislative insanity, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the marked up version contained at pages 374, 375, 376, 377, and 378 of the report. And when you see what is put in red text, Madam Speaker, you will see on page 375, insert the word agreement. On page 376, basically reorganize the language of what was clause 7. It's exactly the same language, it's put into paragraphs instead. You get to page 378, and we are adding subclause 12, notification of affected persons. That subclause 12, by the way, comes from the FATCA. So had we amended the Tax Information Exchange 1989 Act, put in the clause 12, there would have been no need to amend the law. 9 years later, member for Chaguanas East comes to tell this Parliament what the government do, and the government had 4 years. Madam Speaker, had you listened to common sense, the Income Tax Act would have been passed already, because you deleted a colon. Okay, congratulations. Secondly, you added in paragraph 12, clause 12, to the Tax Information Exchange Act. Had you not insisted on repealing the 1989 law and simply amended it in 2017 with the FATCA law and introduced the clause 12, which is a replica of the FATCA Act number 4 of 2017, 2 acts down. You understand what I'm saying, Madam Speaker? 2 pieces of legislation done, 2 minutes flat. Madam Speaker, the third piece of legislation, the Mutual Assistance Multilateral Convention, Madam Speaker, that bill, which is Bill number 13 of 2018, Madam Speaker, we have effectively done nothing to the bill that came. Today we're hearing Chaguanas East talk about sovereignty and will protect people and their constitutional rights. Madam Speaker, the day for sovereignty being exercised by a country is best personified by the Democratic Republic of Korea. Where they stand, North Korea stands on its own as a sovereign entity. Anybody else have to play together. The concept of international sovereignty, where you say to the rest of the world, FATCA, Global Forum, FATF, that you're not going to comply with their standards, is you stand alone. And Madam Speaker, my submission to the people of Trinidad and Tobago through you is that the honorable members opposite are pleased to to have Trinidad and Tobago, apparently pleased to have Trinidad and Tobago descend into chaos. Because, Madam Speaker, let me ask a question. What could have been so difficult to delete the colon in the Income Tax Amendment Act in 2018? What could have been so difficult to put in Clause 12 in the Tax Information Exchange Act in 2017? What could have been so difficult in the Multilateral Convention formula to put into effect when we first brought it? What required a Joint Select Committee, 3rd session, 4th session, and 5th session? What? Madam Speaker, I commend to the people of Trinidad and Tobago the Joint Select Committee report. And I commend it because when you get to the pages I have identified and you see what has actually been marked up in the bill as proposed amendments, you'll realize that 9 years later, we effectively changed about 3 paragraphs.
Attorney General, the initial speaking time is now spent. You're entitled 15 more minutes to wind
Yes,
up.
please.
Members, if the Attorney General exercises his full time, it will take him a few seconds beyond 4:30. So may he be allowed to speak until he's finished. Please continue.
Madam Speaker, so, you know, honorable members opposite are at the position of defending something which is incapable of defense. A simple yes or no, we're going to support. I came a little bit earlier and tried to ask a few questions of a few people opposite whether they're supporting this legislation or not. Madam Speaker, it was like watching an agouti in front of your car when the headlights pass in and it freezes. Cannot move, petrified, can't answer a question. Madam Speaker, the day for Guti politics done, you know. You cannot be engaged in the business of people of Trinidad and Tobago, being paid by the taxpayers, Madam Speaker, and be afraid to actually support legislation. So, Madam Speaker, let's get down to the connections here. Amaniku. I confuse the agouti, which is rat-like in approach. Forgive me, it's understandable. It's Amaniku. Madam Speaker, let's deal with what is in the report. Madam Speaker, we have 17 double taxation relief treaties. We have the ability in our double taxation relief structures to enter into a fast track. The OECD has told us that we cannot, the country cannot get into the phase 2 review unless we sign the multilateral convention. You have to buy the ticket to win the lotto. You have to have the key to turn the door, Madam Speaker. I have completely debunked the attempt to skew the timeline and misrepresent the facts coming opposite. The fact is, since 2017, when we did the Tax Information Exchange Act, we could have prepared for this law and we were ready. And since 2018, we could have passed the Income Tax Amendment Act. And that puts an end to the story. Now, Madam Speaker, there are other points observed by the Global Forum: beneficial ownership, the prohibitions against not pursuing tax crimes, which is contained in the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, Section 22K, 22.2K in particular. There are concerns about a president by order accepting information. All of those other concerns of the Global Forum, we as a government have attended to whilst we pass the Companies Amendment Act, the Non-Profit Organizations Act, the Miscellaneous Provisions legislation in 2018, the amendments to the Income Tax Act, and several other pieces of law. What we find inside of this particular point is simply 2 points, Madam Speaker, left on the table. Madam Speaker, this report, there are 3 reports. There's the report of the 3rd session, Madam Speaker. Let's put them on the record if you don't mind. We have the report of November 22nd, 2019, which is the report which we're debating today. We then have the report of the fourth session, 20th September 2019. We have the report of the third session, September 17th, 2018. These are the three reports. In this report before us today, which we're debating today, there is no minority report. Let me repeat this. November 22nd, 2019, November, December, January, February, 3 months later, in this report, Madam Speaker, which is published for the world to see, all 384 pages of it, there is no minority report coming from the members opposite. None. So I don't know what minority report they're referring to. What the Minister of Finance put on the record was a clear statement that a letter was written on the 20th of September, that is before the November report, that a meeting was convened, that the stakeholders were brought in, there were fulsome discussions, and the report was prepared after we addressed the two concerns coming from the opposition. What are the two concerns? Number one, notification requirements. Number two, the issue of legal professional privilege. That's it. So in September 2019, they raised two issues. We have the meeting. The report is produced in November. The report says this is the report of the entire committee. Why? Because there is no minority report. The honorable members opposite had the opportunity, if they were still insisting upon the views expressed in a letter in September 2019, they could have put it as a minority report, and they did not. 3 months later in February, we cannot get a straight answer from Chaguanas East, and we have noise coming from the other side of the bench as to whether they're supporting or not. Madam Speaker, when we look to the issue of notification, I remind that the exchange of information is of 4 types. There is an automatic exchange of information. There's an exchange of information upon request. There's an exchange of information spontaneously. And there's an exchange of information simultaneously. The notification requirements are embedded into the law now put before us. They say that there's an annual notification issue. And with respect to the issue of legal professional privilege, Madam Speaker, I must address that issue in the short time that I have left as follows. First of all, Madam Speaker, it is not everything that is subject to legal professional privilege. This has been, in fact, the case since time immemorial. It is not every communication that is going to be viewed to be privileged communication. That's point one. Point number two is that there is no legal professional privilege. It can be waived or lost. For instance, you can waive your legal professional privilege and publish advice. It can be lost if you are engaged in a crime. And Madam Speaker, that has been anchored since 1884 in the case of Regina versus Cox and Railton. Legal professional privilege, and I quote from Stephen J., legal professional privilege does not attach where the advice sought was being obtained for the purpose of committing a crime. So, Madam Speaker, when the members of the Joint Select Committee on the opposition side raised the point that they had to have an exception for legal professional privilege, Madam Speaker, let me put it this way. The Board of Inland Revenue, in complying with a request of an outside country or in spontaneously informing another country, they don't inform of legal matters where the privilege has been lost in a tax evasion, because that's a crime. So there is no legal professional privilege with respect to matters of crime or tax evasion. And the Board of Inland Revenue would never have in its possession the advice of lawyers advising a person who the Board of Inland Revenue was looking at for tax evasion. I mean, come on, it's a non sequitur. It does not add up. It makes no sense. It is hogwash. Intellectually, Madam Speaker, it makes no sense, Madam Speaker. Much like some of the mutterings from some people elsewhere. Madam Speaker, I would not insult if I had a straight answer. Naparima, are you supporting this legislation? The country will ask. Madam Speaker. Thank you. Thank you. So, Madam Speaker.
Member for Naparima, I haven't recognized you. The General is on his legs.
Madam Speaker, Jack in the box that gets wound up, that still jumps up but yet does not have a voice. Madam Speaker, a Jack in the box which every child is familiar with, when wound up and jumps up, still doesn't have a brain. Madam Speaker, a Jack in the box when wound up and jumps up still cannot make a contribution. Madam Speaker, but of course I don't refer to anybody in here, because surely that doesn't apply to anybody prone to jumping up without a voice, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, there is no legal professional privilege that attaches to a crime. And, Madam Speaker, what I have to say is, story done, party done. 9 years and several months are over. The Minister of Finance and the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago have worked assiduously since 2015, starting off with begging for an extension beyond 2 weeks after the Minister became the Minister of Finance on the 11th of September 2015, engaging in a fast-track admission, sitting with the OECD and drafting the legislation, begging the UNC in the FATCA legislation not to repeal the Tax Information Exchange Act, begging the UNC in the Income Tax Amendment Bill in 2018 to support that bill, standing here today, watching Chaguanas East's contribution that there was an impactful position to be made in deleting a comma in subsection 5B of the Income Tax Amendment Bill. Okay, I accept that, but today the line must be drawn. The death by 1,000 cuts is real. Trinidad and Tobago is being told by the members opposite that they need to be panicked. And what is this government doing? This government is attempting to get some common sense from the opposition. This government is attempting to get some degree of patriotism from the opposition. This government is attempting to uphold our financial services sector and the businesses of Trinidad and Tobago. This government wants to make sure that people still have jobs, because it is important that we have exchange on the international market. This government wants to be able to purchase medicine from abroad. This government wants to make sure our children's school fees are paid, not just the rich people who could afford school fees. The government has to pay for school fees for scholarship winners too. This government wants to make sure that Trinidad and Tobago is not the only country in the world of Global Forum that is non-compliant. Madam Speaker, it is astounding. November publication of the OECD. Trinidad and Tobago, they have 5 categories in a table. Green, yellow, orange, red. In the red column, Trinidad and Tobago, non-compliant, double asterisk. Footnote says, this jurisdiction applied for fast-track review, but the progress it demonstrated was not sufficient to justify an upgrade in its ratings beyond non-compliant, because, Madam Speaker, we can't enter the gate because we can't pass the law. Here, my good colleague, my good friend, member for Chaguanas East. We will not be rushed. We will stand up for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We will stand behind our leader. We will not be bullied. Really? Really, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, an intellectual bullwhip is required in this parliament today to ensure that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can actually purchase the reward of making laws for the peace order, and good governance of our society. I thank you.
Honorable members, it's 4:29:23. Should we take the suspension now? Okay, so that we shall return at 5 p.m. So this House is now suspended. Return at 5 p.m.